stolen mother. The rain fell like judgment on the auction yard, turning dirt to mud and shame to spectacle. Eliza Marrow stood on the block with iron around her wrists and blood running down her legs, a newborn scream tearing through the thunder. Men laughed. Women turned away. The auctioneer's voice boomed. "Breeding stock, gentlemen, proven fertile, strong back comes with the babe." The bidding started at $50. She closed her eyes and prayed for mercy, or death. Then a voice cut through the cruelty like a rifle shot. 200. The crowd went silent. A man stepped forward, and everything changed. Before we begin this story of survival, courage, and the long road to freedom, I invite you to join me on this journey. If this story moves you, please hit the like button and comment with your city below. I'd love to see how far Eliza's story travels. Now let's begin. The rain came down in sheets, cold and relentless, turning the auction yard into a miserable stretch of churned mud and misery. Eliza Marrow had lost track of time. Hours, maybe days since the pains had started in the back of Voss's wagon. She remembered screaming, remembered hands holding her down, remembered the wet, desperate cry of a baby she hadn't been allowed to hold. Now she stood on the auction block with iron cuffs biting into her wrists, her skirt soaked through with rain and birth blood, and a tiny wailing bundle pressed against her chest. The baby, her baby, was wrapped in a filthy scrap of burlap, squirming and crying, and Eliza's arms shook with the effort of holding her upright. The auctioneer, a florid man with whiskey on his breath, gestured at her like she was a mare. "Breeding stock, gentlemen, proven fertile as they come, strong back, young enough for years of service, and the babe comes with her, no extra charge." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Men in dark coats and broad hats leaned against the fence, their eyes cold and assessing. A few women stood at the edges, their faces hidden beneath bonnets, their silence worse than the men's jeers. Eliza's knees buckled. She caught herself, barely, and felt the baby slip an inch before she tightened her grip. The infant's cries grew sharper, more frantic. $50, someone called from the back. 50? Come now, she's worth more than that. Look at those hips. She'll give you a dozen more before she's used up. Do I hear 60? 60. 70. Eliza stared at the mud beneath her feet. She couldn't look at them. Couldn't bear to see the faces of the men deciding her future, her daughter's future, as if they were livestock. The baby's cries filled her ears, drowning out the voices, the rain, the thunder rolling across the Wyoming hills. She thought about running, but where? Her legs could barely hold her. The men at the gate had rifles, and even if she made it past them, Voss would hunt her down. He always did. 100, the auctioneer grinned. Now we're talking. $100. Do I hear 120? Eliza closed her eyes. She felt the baby's warmth against her chest, felt the fragile flutter of her heartbeat. If this was the end, if she was going to be sold to some brutal stranger who'd work her to death and sell her daughter the moment she was old enough. 200. The voice was quiet, steady, and cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd went silent. Eliza's eyes snapped open. She looked out into the sea of faces, searching for the man who'd spoken. The auctioneer blinked, thrown off his rhythm. $200? Well, now that's a generous bid, sir. Anyone care to challenge it? The crowd shifted. Men muttered. A few glanced around, trying to see who'd spoken, but no one raised their voice. Going once? Going twice? Sold. The gavel cracked down. Eliza's vision swam. She swayed, her legs finally giving out, and she sank to her knees in the mud. The baby screamed. Someone shouted. Then heavy boots splashed through the muck toward her. "Get those irons off her!" The voice was closer now, low and rough, with an edge that brooked no argument. Eliza looked up, rain streaming down her face, and saw him for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the set of his mouth. He wasn't young, 40, maybe older, and his clothes were plain, worn, the kind a working man wore. But there was something in the way he stood, something solid and unyielding, that made the auctioneer step back. "I said get those irons off her." The auctioneer fumbled with a ring of keys, his hands shaking. "Yes, sir, Mr. Hale, right away. Now." The man, Hale, crouched down in front of Eliza. She flinched, clutching the baby tighter, but he didn't reach for her. He just waited, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, until the auctioneer unlocked the cuffs and pulled them away. Eliza gasped as the iron fell free. Her wrists were raw, bruised purple and black, the skin torn in places. She cradled the baby with one arm and pressed the other against her chest, trying to stop the trembling. "Can you stand?" Hale's voice was quieter now, almost gentle. She tried. Her legs shook, her vision blurred, and she felt herself tipping forward. Strong hands caught her, steadying her without pulling her up. Hale's grip was firm but careful, his palms rough with calluses. "Easy. I've got a wagon just outside the yard. Can you make it that far?" Eliza nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. She forced herself upright, one hand gripping his arm for balance, the other still holding the baby. The world tilted and spun, but she set one foot in front of the other, moving through the mud, through the crowd that parted silently to let them pass. Hale didn't hurry her. He walked beside her, his hand hovering near her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell. When they reached the wagon, a sturdy flatbed with a canvas cover, he climbed up first, then turned and offered his hand. Eliza hesitated. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted from her, what he expected, but the baby was still crying, her own body was failing, and there was nowhere else to go. She took his hand. He pulled her up gently, guiding her onto the wagon bed. There was a pile of blankets in the back, clean and dry beneath the canvas. Hale gestured to them. "Sit, you're bleeding." Eliza sank down onto the blankets, her whole body shaking now, adrenaline and exhaustion crashing over her in waves. The baby's cries had faded to weak, hiccuping sobs. Eliza looked down at her, at the tiny, scrunched face, the dark eyes barely open, the impossibly small fingers curled into fists. "She needs to eat," Eliza whispered, her voice cracked. I can't." "You can," Hale said. He climbed into the wagon beside her, keeping a respectful distance, and pulled a canteen from beneath the seat. "Drink first. You're shocky." He held the canteen out to her. Eliza stared at it, then at him. His face was hard to read, serious maybe, but not cruel, not angry. She took the canteen with shaking hands and drank, the water cool and clean, washing away the taste of blood and dust. "Good," Hale said. He glanced at the baby, then back at Eliza. "I'm no midwife, but I've delivered calves and foals. If you need help getting her to nurse, I can do it." The words came out sharper than she meant. She softened her tone. "Thank you. I can do it." Hale nodded and moved to the front of the wagon, giving her privacy. Eliza fumbled with her dress, her hands clumsy and cold, and finally got the baby to latch. The relief was immediate, a deep, aching pull that hurt and soothed at the same time. The baby's cries stopped. The world narrowed to the two of them, the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The wagon lurched forward. Eliza braced herself against the side, one arm cradling the baby, the other gripping the edge of the blanket. Through the gap in the canvas, she could see the auction yard falling away behind them, the crowd dispersing, the rain still coming down. She didn't know where this man was taking her, didn't know what he'd paid $200 for, but for the first time in months, maybe years, she wasn't in chains. See, the ride was long and rough, the wagon jolting over ruts and stones. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness, her body surrendering to exhaustion. The baby slept against her chest, finally quiet, her tiny breaths warm and steady. When the wagon finally stopped, Eliza forced her eyes open. They were in front of a small cabin, set back from the road and surrounded by tall pines. Smoke curled from the chimney. A barn stood off to one side, and beyond it she could see fenced pastures rolling up into the hills. Hale climbed down and came around to the back of the wagon. "We're here." Eliza stared at the cabin. It looked solid, well kept, nothing like the cramped shack Voss had kept her in. But appearances didn't mean safety. She'd learned that the hard way. "Where is here?" she asked quietly. "My land, about 10 miles west of town." Hale offered his hand again. "Come on, you need rest and a proper bed." Eliza didn't move. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between them. Hale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, something sad maybe, or tired. Nothing you're not willing to give, he said finally. You've been through hell. You need time to heal. That's all I'm offering. I don't believe you. Fair enough. He lowered his hand but didn't step back. I'm not asking you to. But you're bleeding, your baby's hungry, and it's cold. So you can sit in this wagon and freeze, or you can come inside and decide what you believe in the morning. Eliza looked down at the baby, her daughter, still nameless, still so fragile. Then she looked at Hale. His face was weathered, lined with years of hard work, but his eyes were steady. Not kind exactly. She didn't trust kindness, but not cruel either. She took his hand. Inside the cabin was warm, lit by a fire crackling in the stone hearth. It was small but clean, one main room with a table, a couple of chairs, a shelf lined with books and tools. A narrow staircase led up to a loft. Hale gestured to a door on the far side of the room. There's a bedroom through there. Bed's made. There's water in the basin, clean linens in the chest. Eliza stood in the doorway, clutching the baby, unsure what to do. Hale moved past her to the hearth and ladled soup from a pot hanging over the fire. He poured it into a bowl and set it on the table. Eat first, then rest. She wanted to refuse, wanted to stay on her feet, stay alert, stay ready to run. But her body had other plans. Her legs wobbled, her vision blurred. She sank into the chair before she could stop herself. The soup was simple, broth, vegetables, a little bit of salt pork, but it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. She ate slowly, one hand holding the spoon, the other keeping the baby secure against her chest. Hale didn't watch her. He busied himself at the hearth, adding wood to the fire, checking the pot, his movements quiet and methodical. When she finished, he took the bowl without a word and nodded toward the bedroom. Go. I'll be out here if you need anything. Eliza stood, her legs steadier now, and crossed to the bedroom. She paused at the door, looking back at him. Why did you buy me? Hale didn't turn around. He stood by the fire, his back to her, his shoulders tense. Because no one should be sold. The words were quiet, almost lost in the crackle of the flames. But Eliza heard them. She stood there for a long moment, studying him, trying to understand. Then she stepped into the bedroom and closed the door. The bed was soft, the blankets heavy and warm. Eliza laid the baby down beside her and stripped off her wet, filthy clothes. Her body was a map of pain, bruises, cuts, the deep ache of childbirth. She washed herself as best she could with the water in the basin, then pulled on a clean nightshirt she found in the chest. It was too big, obviously Hale's, but it was warm and dry. She climbed into bed and pulled the baby close. The infant stirred, made a small sound, then settled again. Eliza stared at her in the dim light filtering through the curtains. She had Voss's dark hair, but her eyes, still unfocused, still new, were lighter, maybe hazel or green. Eliza didn't know who the father was. Voss had sold her to too many men for her to be sure, but it didn't matter. This baby was hers. I don't have a name for you yet, Eliza whispered, but I will. I promise. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Eliza's thumb. Eliza closed her eyes and let herself cry. Silent, shaking sobs that she muffled against the pillow. She cried for everything she'd lost, everything she'd endured, everything she didn't know how to carry. And then, finally, she slept. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of voices outside. Panic jolted through her. She sat up, clutching the baby, her heart pounding. The voices grew louder, men, talking, laughing. Eliza stumbled out of bed and crept to the window. Through the glass, she could see Hale standing in the yard with two other men. They were dressed like ranch hands, their horses tied to the fence. One of them clapped Hale on the shoulder, said something Eliza couldn't hear, and they all laughed. Her stomach twisted. Hale had seemed different yesterday, quiet, careful, almost respectful. But men were good at pretending. Voss had been charming once, too. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. The door to the bedroom had no lock. The cabin had only one exit. If those men came inside, a knock on the door made her jump. It's me, Hale's voice, calm and even. I'm coming in. The door opened slowly. Hale stepped inside, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Eliza, then at the baby, then back at her. You're awake. Good. There's breakfast on the table. Eliza didn't move. Who are those men? Ranch hands. They work my land. Hale set his hat on the chair by the door. They're leaving now. You won't see them again unless you want to. And if I don't want to? Then you won't. He said it like it was simple, like her wants mattered. I'm not keeping you here, Eliza. You can leave any time you choose. She stared at him. You paid $200 for me. I paid $200 to get you away from that auction yard. What you do now is your choice. Nothing's a choice when you're owned. Hale's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the window, his hands flexing at his sides. You're not owned. Not by me. Not by anyone. I don't believe you. I know. He picked up his hat and moved toward the door. But it's still true. He left, closing the door gently behind him. Eliza stood there, the baby warm against her chest, her mind spinning. She didn't know what to believe. Didn't know what to do. But she was still here, still breathing, still holding her daughter. And for now, that was enough. Over the next few days, Eliza watched. She watched Hale move through the cabin with quiet efficiency, making meals, tending the fire, leaving food on the table for her without asking if she'd eaten. She watched him work outside, mending fences, feeding the horses, chopping wood. He never came into her room uninvited, never asked her questions, never touched her. The door stayed unlocked. She tested it on the second day, turning the handle slowly, half expecting it to be barred from the outside. But it opened easily, and she stood in the doorway, staring out at the main room, at Hale sitting by the fire with a book in his lap. He glanced up, met her eyes, and nodded. Then he went back to reading. Eliza closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The baby stirred in her arms, and she rocked her gently, trying to make sense of what was happening. On the third day, she ventured out. The baby, she'd started calling her Daisy in her mind after the wildflowers she'd seen growing near the cabin, was fussy, hungry, and Eliza needed to eat if she was going to keep nursing. She found Hale at the table, sketching something on a piece of paper. He looked up when she entered. Morning? Morning. Her voice was rusty, uncertain. Hale gestured to the stove. There's oatmeal, coffee, if you want it. Eliza hesitated, then moved to the stove. She ladled oatmeal into a bowl with one hand, balancing Daisy with the other. Hale stood and crossed to her. Here, let me. He reached for the baby, and Eliza jerked back, her body moving before her mind could catch up. Hale froze, his hand still extended, his expression carefully blank. I just thought, if you need both hands, I'm fine. All right. He stepped back, giving her space. Eliza's hand shook as she finished serving herself. She carried the bowl to the table and sat, keeping Daisy cradled in one arm while she ate. Hale returned to his seat and his sketching, the silence between them heavy but not hostile. After a few minutes, Eliza spoke. What are you drawing? Hale glanced up, surprised. Plans for a new barn. The old one's starting to rot. You do the work yourself? Most of it. Hire help when I need it. He paused. You ask a lot of questions for someone who doesn't trust me. I don't trust you. I know. He set his pencil down. But you're still here. Eliza didn't have an answer for that. She finished her oatmeal in silence, then stood to wash the bowl. Hale watched her, his gaze steady but not intrusive. You need anything? He asked. Clothes, for the baby. Eliza's voice was quiet. She's outgrowing the blanket. Hale nodded. I'll ride into town tomorrow. Get what you need. I can't pay you. I'm not asking you to. Eliza turned to face him. Why are you doing this? Hale stood, picking up his hat from the table. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Because someone should have done it for my sister, he said quietly, and no one did. He left before Eliza could respond. That night, Eliza lay awake, Daisy asleep beside her, and thought about Hale's words. She thought about the sadness in his voice, the weight of old grief. She thought about the door that stayed unlocked, the food that appeared without expectation, the careful distance he kept. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he wasn't. But for the first time in years, Eliza let herself imagine what it might feel like to believe him. The days slipped into a rhythm. Hale worked the land. Eliza cared for Daisy, slowly regaining her strength. They spoke in brief exchanges, practical, cautious, never pushing too far. Hale brought clothes from town, soft cotton dresses for the baby, sturdy wool for Eliza. He left them on the table without comment. One morning, Eliza found a scrawny kitten mewling near the barn. It was orange and white, barely weaned, its ribs showing through its patchy fur. She picked it up, and it burrowed into her hands, purring. Hale came around the corner and stopped. Barn cat probably got separated from its mother. "Can I keep it?" The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Hale's expression softened, just a fraction. "It's your choice." Eliza held the kitten close. "I'll call him Copper." Hale nodded. "Copper it is." Chad. Spring crept closer, the snow melting in patches, the air warming. Eliza began to venture outside more often, Daisy bundled against her chest, Copper trotting at her heels. She explored the property, the pastures, the barn, the creek that ran along the southern edge. It was quiet here, peaceful, dangerous in its own way. Peace made you soft, made you forget. But Eliza couldn't forget. Not when every sound made her jump. Not when every shadow looked like Voss. And then one afternoon, a rider appeared on the road. Eliza was in the yard, hanging laundry, when she saw him. A man in a dark coat, riding slow, his eyes scanning the property. Her blood turned to ice. She snatched Daisy from the basket at her feet and ran for the cabin. "Hale!" He was inside, sharpening an axe. He looked up as she burst through the door, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Someone's coming." Hale set the axe down and crossed to the window. He watched the rider approach, his jaw tightening. "Stay inside," he said. "Who is it?" "Don't know yet." Hale stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Eliza pressed herself against the wall. Daisy clutched to her chest, her heart hammering. She could hear voices, Hale's, low and steady, and another man's, sharper, colder. "I'm looking for a woman. Runaway. Goes by Eliza Marrow." Eliza's breath stopped. "Don't know anyone by that name," Hale said. "She was sold at auction last month, bought by a man named Warren Hale. That you?" "Might be." "Then you've got her." "I've got no one. Just me and my land." The other man's voice hardened. "Her owner wants her back. Paid good money for her. You interfere. You're breaking the law." "Her owner?" Hale's voice was steel. "She's not property. Law says different." Eliza couldn't see them, but she could feel the tension crackling through the air. She heard boots shift in the dirt, heard the creak of leather. "You've got no warrant," Hale said. "No proof. So unless you want trouble, I suggest you ride back to whoever sent you and tell them they're wasting their time." There was a long silence. Then the other man laughed, low and mean. "This ain't over, Hale." "It is unless you want it to be." More silence. Then the sound of hooves, retreating. Eliza sagged against the wall, her legs giving out. She slid to the floor, Daisy crying now, her own breath coming in ragged gasps. The door opened. Hale stepped inside, his face grim. He looked at Eliza, at the fear written across her face, and something shifted in his expression, something fierce and protective. "He's gone," Hale said quietly. "But he'll be back." Eliza nodded, unable to speak. Hale crouched down in front of her, his voice steady. "I'm not letting them take you. You hear me? I'm not letting them take either of you." Eliza looked at him, at the hard line of his jaw, the resolve in his eyes, and for the first time she believed him. "What do we do?" she whispered. Hale stood, his hand resting on the rifle above the door. "We get ready." The next morning came cold and clear, the kind of Wyoming dawn that made the world look deceptively peaceful. Eliza stood at the window, Daisy asleep in the cradle Hale had built from pine scraps, and watched him work in the yard. He moved with purpose, checking fences, reinforcing the barn door, his rifle never far from reach. She hadn't slept. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind through the pines had sounded like riders coming back. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Voss had found her. Of course he had. Men like Voss didn't let go of what they considered theirs. Copper wound between her ankles, purring, and she bent to scratch behind his ears. The simple gesture steadied her, pulled her back from the edge of panic. She needed to think, needed to plan. Running wasn't an option. Not with a newborn, not in this weather, not when she didn't know the country. But staying felt like waiting for a noose to tighten. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and Hale's solid presence. He stamped snow from his boots and hung his coat on the peg, his movements deliberate. When he finally looked at her, his expression was grave. "We need to talk." Eliza's stomach clenched, but she nodded. They sat at the table, the morning light slanting through the window between them. Hale poured coffee, pushed a cup toward her, then wrapped his hands around his own. "The man yesterday works for Calder Voss. You know that name?" "I know it." Her voice came out flat, hollow. "He owned me before the auction." "He's claiming you ran. Says you're stolen property." Hale's jaw worked. "He's got a bill of sale dated 2 months back. Says you're bound to him for another 3 years. Eliza's hands shook. She set the cup down before she dropped it. "I didn't run. He sold me, put me on that block himself." "I believe you. But Voss is telling a different story, and he's got paper to back it up." Hale leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The law here, it's not clean. Territorial judge might rule in his favor just to avoid trouble, or he might not. But either way, Voss isn't going to wait for a court date. So what do? We make it too expensive for him to try." Hale pulled a folded paper from his pocket and smoothed it on the table. It was a map, hand-drawn, showing the ranch and the surrounding land. "This property's got good lines of sight. Anyone coming up the road will see them from half a mile out. The cabin's solid, thick walls, small windows. We can hold it if we have to." Eliza stared at the map, her mind struggling to catch up. "You're talking about a fight." "I'm talking about making sure there isn't one. Voss is a businessman. He'll send men to test us, see if we're serious. If we stand firm, if we make it clear it'll cost him more than you're worth, he might back down." "And if he doesn't?" Hale met her eyes, and she saw the truth there before he spoke it. "Then we fight." The words hung between them, heavy with consequence. Eliza thought about Daisy, sleeping peacefully 20 feet away, thought about blood on the snow, about men with guns, about everything that could go wrong. "Why?" The question came out barely a whisper. "Why would you risk this for me?" Hale was quiet for a long moment. He turned his cup in slow circles, his gaze distant. "I had a sister, Emma. She was 16 when a man twice her age decided he wanted her. Our father owed him money, so he took her instead. Called it an indenture, but it was slavery dressed up in legal words." His voice roughened. "I was working a cattle drive 300 miles away. By the time I got back, she was dead. He'd worked her to death in 18 months. Eliza's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I swore I'd never stand by again, never let it happen if I could stop it." He looked up at her, his eyes hard with old grief and new resolve. "So that's why. Because you're here, and I can do something about it." Eliza wanted to say something, to offer comfort or gratitude, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached across the table and laid her hand over his. His skin was rough, scarred from years of work, but warm. He went still, then slowly turned his hand over, his fingers closing gently around hers. They sat like that for a breath, two damaged people finding unexpected ground. Then Eliza pulled back. Hale cleared his throat and stood. "I'm riding into town. Need to talk to the sheriff, see where he stands. You'll be safe here. Doors are solid, rifles loaded. Anyone comes, you bar the door and don't open it for anyone but me." "What if they don't wait for you to come back?" "Then you shoot them." He said it simply, without bravado. "You know how to use a rifle?" "No." Hale crossed to the wall and took down the Winchester. He checked the chamber, then handed it to her. The weight was unfamiliar, awkward in her hands. He moved behind her, adjusting her grip, showing her how to brace the stock against her shoulder. "Sight down the barrel. Breathe out slow. Squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it." His voice was close to her ear, calm and instructive. "You probably won't hit what you're aiming at the first time, but the noise alone will make most men think twice." Eliza tried to focus on the mechanics, on the feel of the wood and metal, but all she could think about was the possibility of actually needing this, of men coming through that door, of having to choose between her life and theirs. "I don't know if I can." "You can." Hale stepped back, giving her space. "You've already survived worse than most people ever face. This is just one more thing." He made it sound simple. Maybe for him it was. Eliza set the rifle on the table and looked at Daisy's cradle, at the gentle rise and fall of the baby's breathing. How long will you be gone? Few hours. I'll be back before dark. Hale pulled on his coat, settled his hat. At the door he paused. Eliza, you're stronger than you think. Don't forget that. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Eliza was alone with her daughter, a rifle, and the weight of waiting. She tried to keep busy, changed Daisy, nursed her, washed the breakfast dishes. Copper chased dust motes in the sunlight, oblivious to the tension thrumming through the cabin. But every few minutes, Eliza found herself at the window, scanning the road, her heart jumping at every shadow. Midday came and went. She made soup, more to have something to do than because she was hungry. The cabin felt smaller with each passing hour, the walls pressing in. She paced with Daisy, singing half-remembered songs from her childhood, trying to calm them both. It was late afternoon, the sun already sinking toward the mountains, when she heard it, the distant sound of hooves, multiple riders, moving fast. Eliza's blood turned cold. She rushed to the window and saw them cresting the hill, 4 men on horseback, pushing hard. Not Hale. These riders moved with aggressive intent, spreading out as they approached, flanking the cabin. She grabbed the rifle with shaking hands and ran to the door, throwing the heavy wooden bar across it. Daisy started crying, sensing her mother's fear. Eliza's mind raced. The windows. Could they break through? The back door? She'd never checked if it was barred. She sprinted across the cabin, Daisy bouncing against her shoulder, and found the back entrance already secured. Thank God. She returned to the front window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The riders had stopped 30 yards out, dismounting. One of them, a lean man with a deputy's badge catching the light, stepped forward. Eliza Marrow, we know you're in there. Come out peaceable, and nobody gets hurt. Eliza's breath came in short gasps. She recognized his voice from yesterday. Voss's man. Her hands fumbled with the rifle, trying to remember everything Hale had taught her. We got legal right, the deputy called. You're contracted property, and we're taking you back. The words hit like a physical blow. Property. Even here, even after everything, that's all she was to them. Eliza felt something crack inside her, not breaking, but hardening. She moved to the door, keeping well back from it. I'm not going anywhere. Her voice surprised her with its strength. You got no right to me. We got a bill of sale says different. Now you can come quiet, or we can come in and get you. This is Warren Hale's property. You're trespassing. One of the other men laughed, the sound cruel and casual. Hale ain't here, sweetheart. Just you and that baby. Now, we can do this easy, or we can do it hard. Your choice. Eliza's hands tightened on the rifle. Through the window, she saw them spread out further, 2 moving toward the sides of the cabin. They were going to try to flank her, maybe break through a window or the back door despite the bar. Daisy's cries grew louder, more frantic. Eliza's mind fractured between the need to comfort her child and the need to defend them both. She couldn't do both. Couldn't hold the baby and aim the rifle. Couldn't. A new sound cut through her panic. More horses, coming fast from the opposite direction. Eliza's heart leaped. Through the window, she saw Hale galloping up the road, another man beside him. They didn't slow as they approached, and the deputy's men scrambled for their horses. Hale reined in hard, his horse sliding in the dirt, and he was off before it fully stopped, rifle in hand. The man with him was older, heavy-set, with a sheriff's star on his coat. That's far enough, the sheriff's voice boomed across the yard. Nobody's taking anybody anywhere. The deputy stepped forward, his hand hovering near his gun. Sheriff Garrett, didn't expect to see you out this way. Clearly, Garrett dismounted, moving with surprising speed for his size. You want to tell me what you're doing on private property, Jackson, threatening a woman and child? Just executing legal process, Sheriff. Got a bill of sale for the woman. She's contracted to Calder Voss. That so? Garrett held out his hand. Let's see it. The deputy, Jackson, hesitated, then pulled a folded document from his coat. Garrett took it, unfolded it, and read in silence. His expression darkened. This is dated before the auction. Yes, sir. Which makes the auction illegal. She was already owned. Except Voss himself put her on that block. Hale's voice was hard, controlled. I was there. Heard the auctioneer say she was Voss's property being sold to settle accounts. That's not what Mr. Voss says. Then Mr. Voss is a liar. Hale stepped forward, his rifle still in hand but pointed at the ground. He sold her to me, legal and proper. I got witnesses and I got the auctioneer's records. Jackson's jaw tightened. Mr. Voss claims she ran before the auction. This bill of sale proves ownership. Convenient timing, don't you think? Garrett folded the paper and handed it back. Here's what's going to happen, Jackson. You're going to get back on your horses and ride out. Hale and I are going to go see Judge Morrison tomorrow, sort this out proper. If Voss has a legitimate claim, the judge will hear it, but there'll be no seizures, no violence, not on my watch. Sheriff, with respect, that wasn't a suggestion. Garrett's hand rested on his own sidearm now. You got a problem with how I'm handling this. You take it up with the territorial marshal, but right now, you're leaving. The tension stretched tight as a wire. Eliza watched from the window, her heart hammering, the rifle heavy in her hands. Jackson looked at his men, then at Hale, then at the sheriff. Whatever calculation he was making, it didn't come out in his favor. This ain't finished, he said finally. Maybe not, Garrett replied. But it's finished for today. Jackson mounted, his men following suit. They rode out slowly, their departure more threat than retreat. When they finally disappeared over the hill, Eliza's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, the rifle clattering beside her, and pulled Daisy close. The baby was red-faced, screaming, and Eliza buried her face in her daughter's hair and shook. The door rattled. Eliza, it's me! Open up! It took her 3 tries to lift the bar with trembling hands. The door swung open, and Hale was there, his face tight with concern. He took in her pale face, her shaking hands, and carefully took the rifle from where it lay. You all right? She wanted to say yes, wanted to be strong, composed, unafraid. Instead, she shook her head and felt tears spill down her cheeks. Hale crouched beside her, his presence solid and grounding. You did good. Held them off until we got here. I didn't do anything. I couldn't. You kept your daughter safe. That's everything. He glanced back at Garrett, who'd followed him inside. Sheriff, this is Eliza Marrow. Eliza, Sheriff Tom Garrett. Garrett removed his hat, his expression gentle. Ma'am, I'm sorry you had to go through that scare. Eliza wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together. Are they really gone? For now, Garrett pulled out a chair and sat heavily. But Hale was right to fetch me. This situation's messier than I'd like. You saw the bill of sales, Hale said. It's fake. Maybe, but it's got Voss's signature and it's notarized. Judge Morrison's going to have to sort out which transaction is legitimate, the indenture or the auction. Garrett looked at Eliza. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. I know it's hard, but I need to hear your side. Eliza's throat tightened, but she nodded. Hale moved to the stove, giving her space but staying close. She heard him making coffee, the familiar sounds anchoring her. How did you come to be with Voss? Garrett asked. I was sold to him 2 years ago. The man I worked for before, he sold me to pay debts. Sold you how? What were the terms? 5-year indenture. Work off the debt, then I'd be free. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But Voss, he didn't use me for work, not the kind that pays off debt. Garrett's expression hardened, but he kept his voice gentle. He used you another way. Yes. And the child? Eliza's arms tightened around Daisy. She's mine. I'm not questioning that, ma'am. But if Voss claims fatherhood, he can't. The words came out fierce, protective. I don't know who the father is. Voss sold me to other men, lots of them. But Daisy's mine and no one else's. The silence that followed was thick with fury. Garrett's barely contained and Hale's radiating from where he stood frozen at the stove. After a moment, Garrett cleared his throat. That changes things. If Voss was running what amounts to a brothel under cover of an indenture, you can't prove it, Eliza said dully. It's my word against his. And he's got money, connections. I'm nobody. You're not nobody, Hale said quietly, setting coffee cups on the table. Not anymore. Garrett took a long drink, thinking. Here's the truth, ma'am. The law's not built for justice in cases like this. It's built to protect property, and sometimes it's hard to convince a judge that a person isn't property. But we've got a few things working for us. 1, Hale's got a legitimate bill of sale from a public auction. 2, I'm willing to testify that Voss's men tried to seize you without proper legal process. 3, he paused. 3, Judge Morrison's got a daughter. He doesn't like men who abuse women. Will that be enough? I don't know, but it's what we've got. Garrett stood. I'll file a complaint first thing tomorrow, get a hearing scheduled. Meantime, Hale, you keep her safe. And ma'am, if you're willing, I'd like you to come to town tomorrow. Tell the judge what you told me. Fear spiked through her. Go to town. Where Voss is? I'll be there, Hale said. Sheriff will be there. You won't be alone. And if the judge rules against me? No one answered. The silence was answer enough. After Garrett left, promising to return in the morning, Eliza sat at the table while Hale checked the doors, the windows, the rifle. Daisy had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying, and Eliza held her carefully, afraid that if she let go, everything would fall apart. You should eat something, Hale said. I'm not hungry. Eliza, I can't go to town tomorrow. The words burst out of her. I can't face him. I can't sit in a room and tell strangers what he did, what he made me. You don't have to. Hale sat across from her, his voice steady. If you want to run instead, I'll get you out of here tonight. Give you money, supplies, whatever you need. She looked up at him, startled. You'd do that? I said you're not owned. That means you choose. If you want to fight, I'll fight beside you. If you want to run, I'll help you run. But it's your choice. Eliza stared at him, this quiet man who'd bought her freedom and asked nothing in return, who'd faced down armed men and offered her a way out even now. She thought about running, disappearing into the wilderness, starting over somewhere new. It was what she'd always done. Run, hide, survive. But Daisy deserved better than a life spent running, deserved a home, a name, a future that wasn't built on fear. If I testify, she said slowly, and the judge rules for Voss, then we'll figure out the next step. But at least you'll have tried. And if they take me anyway? Hale's expression went hard. They won't. It wasn't a promise he could keep, and they both knew it. But the conviction in his voice, the steel in his eyes, it made her believe just for a moment that maybe he could. All right, she whispered. I'll go. That night, Eliza lay awake again, listening to Daisy's soft breathing, to the wind in the pines, to the old cabin settling around them. Copper curled against her side, warm and purring. She thought about tomorrow, about facing Voss, about standing in front of a judge and laying bare the worst moments of her life. And she thought about Hale, sleeping on the floor by the fire, his rifle within reach, standing guard over a woman he barely knew. Maybe trust was too strong a word, but something was growing in the space between fear and hope. Something fragile and new, like the first green shoots pushing through late winter snow. She would go to town, she would testify, and whatever happened next, at least she would face it standing up. Morning came too soon, pale and cold, the sky the color of old iron. Eliza woke to the sound of Hale moving through the cabin, stoking the fire, his movements careful and quiet. She lay still for a moment, Daisy warm against her chest, and tried to gather the courage she'd promised herself the night before. It felt thinner in the daylight, more breakable. She rose and dressed in the cleanest clothes she had, a dark wool dress Hale had brought from town, simple and sturdy. Her hands shook as she buttoned it, and she had to stop twice to steady herself. When she emerged from the bedroom, Hale was at the table with coffee and bread, his face drawn with sleeplessness. Sheriff's coming at 8, he said. We'll ride in together. Stay close to town center, near the courthouse. Eliza nodded and sat. Though her stomach rebelled at the thought of food, she forced herself to eat anyway, knowing she'd need the strength. Daisy fussed in her arms and she shifted the baby to nurse, grateful for the distraction. Hale watched her for a moment, then spoke quietly. You don't have to do this. I know. I mean it. We can leave right now, be 50 miles gone by nightfall. Eliza met his eyes. And then what? Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when Voss will find us again? She shook her head. I'm tired of running. Running's kept you alive this long. Living's not the same as being alive. The words surprised her, but they felt true. She looked down at Daisy, at the tiny face that depended on her for everything. I want her to grow up free, really free. That means ending this. Hale's expression shifted, something like respect crossing his features. All right then, but you stay close to me in that courtroom. Anything feels wrong, we leave. What if the judge orders, I don't care what he orders, you're not going back to Voss? His voice was flat, absolute. That's not happening. The certainty in his words should have frightened her, the implication of what he'd do to prevent it. But instead it steadied her. Whatever happened today, she wouldn't face it alone. Garrett arrived as promised, his horse trailing a gentle mare. Figured the baby'd ride easier on Bess here, he said, nodding to the second horse. She's steady, won't spook. The ride into town took an hour, the three of them moving through country that grew more settled as they approached. Eliza saw other homesteads, smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in yards. Normal life, the kind she'd stopped believing existed. Daisy slept against her chest, wrapped in blankets, oblivious to the tension coiling tighter with each mile. The town itself was larger than she'd expected. 2 main streets lined with storefronts, a church, a school, the courthouse rising at the far end in stolid brick. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their business, and Eliza felt their eyes tracking her as they passed. News traveled fast in small towns. They'd know why she was here. Garrett led them around back to the courthouse, dismounting near a side entrance. Hearing's set for 10. Judge Morrison's already inside. Saw his buggy. He helped Eliza down, his grip steady. How you holding up, ma'am? I'm here. It was all she could manage. They entered through a narrow hallway, their footsteps echoing on wood floors. The building smelled of old paper and tobacco, years of legal proceedings soaked into the walls. Garrett showed them to a small room with a bench and a window overlooking the street. Wait here. I'll let you know when the judge is ready. After he left, Eliza sat with Daisy, trying to breathe evenly. Hale stood at the window, one hand resting on the sill, the other near the gun at his hip. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Hale! Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He turned. Yeah? Why did you really buy me that day? The truth. He was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he crossed to the bench and sat beside her, leaving careful space between them. I told you about my sister, that's true. But there's more. He stared at his hands, scarred and calloused. After Emma died, I hunted down the man who killed her. Took me 2 years to find him. When I did, he stopped, his jaw working. I didn't kill him. Wanted to, but I didn't. Turned him over to the law instead, thinking that was the right thing, the honorable thing. What happened? Judge threw the case out, said there wasn't enough evidence, that Emma had signed the indenture willingly. Man walked free. Hale's voice went rough. 3 months later, he did it to another girl. She was 14. Eliza's breath caught. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I had the chance to stop him, and I didn't. Chose law over justice, and a child died for it. He finally looked at her. So when I saw you on that block, bleeding and terrified, I knew I wouldn't make that mistake again. Law be damned. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Eliza shifted Daisy in her arms, then did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took Hale's hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. You're a good man, Warren Hale. I'm a man who's trying, that's all. Before she could respond, the door opened. Garrett stood there, his expression grim. Judge is ready, but Eliza, Voss is here. The words hit like a fist. Eliza's hand tightened on Hale's, her pulse spiking. Where? In the courtroom. He's got a right to be present for the hearing. Garrett's tone was apologetic. I'll be right there with you. You don't have to look at him if you don't want to. I can wait outside, Hale said. Hold the baby. No. Eliza stood, forcing steel into her spine. I need you there. Both of you. The courtroom was smaller than she'd imagined, just a raised bench for the judge, a few rows of seats, windows letting in pale winter light. And there, in the front row, sat Calder Voss. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with iron gray hair and cold blue eyes. He wore a fine suit, looked every inch the respectable businessman. When Eliza entered, those eyes found her and held, and she felt the familiar weight of his possession trying to settle over her like a shroud. She kept walking, kept her chin up, kept Daisy close. Judge Morrison was an older man, lean and weathered, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He studied Eliza as she took her seat, then Voss, then the document spread before him on the bench. "Let's get started." His voice was dry, businesslike. "This is a hearing to determine ownership and contractual obligation regarding one Eliza Marrow. Mr. Voss, you claim she's bound to you under an indenture agreement dated—" He glanced at the paper. "March 15th, 1893. Is that correct?" Voss stood, his voice smooth and confident. "Yes, Your Honor. 5-year indenture to work off debts incurred by her previous employer. The contract was legally notarized and filed with the territorial office. And yet you sold her at public auction last month." "A misunderstanding, Your Honor. My foreman acted without authorization. Mrs. Marrow had run away, and he thought she was unclaimed property. I've since corrected his error." The lie was delivered so smoothly, so convincingly, that Eliza felt sick. Judge Morrison's expression didn't change. "Mr. Hale, you purchased Mrs. Marrow at said auction. What's your position?" Hale stood, his voice steady. "I bought her in good faith, Your Honor. The auctioneer clearly stated she was being sold to settle Mr. Voss's accounts. There was no mention of any existing indenture. I have witnesses who will testify to that." "So noted." The judge turned to Eliza. "Mrs. Marrow, approach the bench." Eliza's legs barely held her as she stood. She walked forward, Daisy clutched against her chest, and faced the judge. Behind her, she could feel Voss's eyes burning into her back. "You understand you're under oath," Morrison said. "You tell me the truth, nothing but. Clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Now, in your own words, what happened?" Eliza's mouth went dry. She looked at the judge, at his stern but not unkind face, and made herself speak. "I was sold to Mr. Voss 2 years ago. He told me I'd work in his house, cooking and cleaning, and after 5 years the debt would be paid." "And did you work in his house?" "For the first month. Then he—" Her voice caught. She forced it forward. "Then he started bringing men to my room at night. Told me I had to do what they wanted, or he'd add years to my contract." The courtroom went silent. Even the scratching of the clerk's pen stopped. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. "Go on." "He sold me, over and over, sometimes to the same men, sometimes to strangers passing through. He kept the money and said I was working off my debt, but the debt never got smaller. It kept growing." The words were coming faster now, years of silence breaking open. "When I got pregnant, he was angry, said I was damaged goods, but then he decided the baby would be worth something too, so he waited until I gave birth. Then he put us both on the auction block." "That's a lie!" Voss surged to his feet. "Your Honor, this woman is a known runaway and a thief. She's making up stories to avoid honoring her legal obligations. Sit down, Mr. Voss." The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "You'll have your turn." Voss sat, but his face was red with fury. Eliza felt her legs shaking, felt Daisy squirming against her chest, and fought to keep standing. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Marrow, do you have any proof of these allegations?" "No, sir, just my word." "Your word against a man with money and connections. You understand that puts you at a disadvantage." "I understand that's how it's always been." Eliza's voice steadied, anger replacing fear. "Men like him get away with it because women like me don't have proof. We're just property that can talk. But that doesn't make it right." Something shifted in the judge's expression. He sat back, steepling his fingers, and was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying weight. "Mr. Voss, I've known you for 15 years. You're a prominent businessman in this territory. You sit on the town council. You donate to the church." He paused. "You're also known to have a stable of young women working in that big house of yours, and none of them ever seem to stay more than a year or two. I've always wondered about that." Voss's face went pale, then red again. "Your Honor, those are just servants. Sheriff Garrett, you have something to add?" Garrett stood, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. Yes, sir. I've been doing some asking around, found 3 women in the past 5 years who left Voss's employment. 2 of them told similar stories to what Mrs. Marrow just said. They were too scared to file formal complaints, but they were willing to talk to me off the record. This is outrageous, Voss slammed his hand on the bench in front of him. Hearsay and slander. It's a pattern, Mr. Voss, and patterns tell me where to look. Morrison shuffled through his papers. Now, this indenture contract you're presenting, it's notarized, yes, but the notary's signature looks peculiar to me. Sheriff, I want you to verify it with the territorial office, see if it matches their records. Already did, Your Honor. Garrett's voice held grim satisfaction. The notary named on this document died 6 months before this contract was supposedly signed. The silence that followed was absolute. Eliza saw Voss's face go from red to white, saw his hands clench on the armrest. The judge's expression was carved from stone. Mr. Voss, you've presented this court with a fraudulent document. That's a criminal offense. Your Honor, there must be some mistake. The only mistake was yours, thinking I wouldn't check. Morrison's voice was ice. Here's my ruling. The indenture contract is void. Mrs. Marrow is a free woman. Furthermore, I'm ordering the sheriff to investigate your business practices. And if he finds evidence of what I think he's going to find, you'll be facing charges that make document fraud look like a church social. He banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Eliza stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Free. He'd said she was free. The word didn't feel real, didn't fit in her mouth or her mind. Voss erupted from his seat, his face contorted with rage. You can't do this. I have rights. I paid for her fair and square. You just admitted she's property, Mr. Voss. The judge's smile was thin and dangerous. Keep talking. Give me more rope. Garrett moved quickly, positioning himself between Voss and Eliza. Hale was suddenly at her side, his hand on her back, steady and grounding. We're leaving, Hale said quietly. Now. They moved toward the door, but Voss's voice followed them, shaking with fury. This isn't over, Hale. You think a piece of paper makes you safe? You think... Mr. Voss, one more word and I'll hold you in contempt. Morrison's gavel cracked down again. Sheriff, escort him out. Different door. They made it outside into cold air and weak sunlight. Eliza's legs finally gave out on the courthouse steps, and she sat down hard, Daisy wailing now, everything spinning. Hale crouched beside her, his presence solid while the world tilted. Breathe, he said quietly. Just breathe. She tried. Pulled air into her lungs, let it out, pulled it in again. Slowly, the spinning stopped. She looked at Daisy's red, scrunched face and felt something break open in her chest. Not breaking apart, but breaking free. I'm free, she whispered. You're free. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, washing away 2 years of accumulated horror. Hale didn't try to stop them or offer empty comfort. He just sat beside her on the cold stone steps and waited while she fell apart and slowly, carefully, began to piece herself back together. Garrett emerged from the courthouse, his expression troubled. Eliza, I'm going to need you to make a formal statement. Document everything for the investigation. Can you do that? She nodded, wiping her eyes. When? Tomorrow's soon enough. Let you get your bearings first. He glanced at Hale. Get her home. And Hale, stay sharp. Voss looked like a man who's got nothing left to lose. They rode back slowly, Daisy finally sleeping, the world around them achingly normal. Cattle grazed in distant pastures. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life went on, indifferent to the small miracle that had just occurred in a courthouse on the edge of nowhere. But as they approached Hale's property, Eliza felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. Something was wrong. She couldn't name it, couldn't point to it, but her body knew. Hale felt it too. He reined in, his hand moving to his rifle. Stay behind me. They crested the last hill and Eliza's heart stopped. The cabin door stood open, swinging slightly in the wind. The barn door too. And in the yard, Copper. The little orange kitten lay motionless in the dirt. No. The word tore out of her. She started to dismount, but Hale's arm shot out, stopping her. Wait, could be a trap. Copper. I know. but we go careful." They approached the cabin slowly, Hale in front, rifle ready. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of the door and the wind in the pines. Hale dismounted and moved to the cabin, checking the corners, the windows. Then he went inside. He emerged a moment later, his face grim. They were here, tore the place apart. Eliza slid from her horse, Daisy clutched tight, and ran to Copper. The kitten lifted his head weakly, mewing. Relief flooded through her. Not dead, just hurt. She scooped him up gently, feeling along his small body for breaks. He'd been kicked, she thought, but nothing felt broken. "Why?" she asked, looking at the destroyed cabin, at the evidence of violent rage. "The judge ruled. Voss doesn't care about rulings." Hale's voice was flat. "This is a message." As if summoned by his name, riders appeared on the horizon. Not 4 this time. 8, maybe 10, spread out in a line, moving with purpose. They weren't pretending to be lawmen anymore. This was something else, something final. Hale saw them and moved fast. "Inside now." "Warren! Now! Eliza!" She ran for the cabin, Copper tucked under one arm, Daisy under the other. Hale was right behind her, slamming the door, dropping the bar. He moved to the windows, checking sight lines, his movements efficient and grim. "How many rifles you got?" Eliza asked, her voice steadier than she felt. 2. Shotgun. Revolver. He glanced at her. "You remember what I taught you?" "Point and shoot." "Close enough." He handed her the Winchester, then moved to the other window with his own rifle. "They come in shooting range. You aim for center mass. Don't hesitate." The riders stopped at the edge of the property, just out of rifle range. Eliza could see Voss among them, unmistakable even at this distance. They sat their horses, waiting, and the silence stretched taut as a drumhead. Then Voss's voice carried across the distance, amplified by anger and the cold air. "Send her out, Hale. Send her out, and we ride away." "Go to hell!" Hale shouted back. "You're outnumbered, outgunned. You can't win this. Don't have to win, just have to make it cost you." Voss's laugh was ugly, sharp. "Cost me? Boy, I'm already ruined. Judge is going to shut me down, investigate me, probably hang me. So what exactly do I have to lose?" The truth of it settled over the cabin like snow. A man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind. Eliza looked at Daisy in her arms, at Copper trembling against her chest, and felt fear claw up her throat. "Last chance, Hale. Her and the baby. That's all I want." "Then you're going to be disappointed." A long pause. Then Voss's voice again, colder now. "So be it. Boys, burn them out." The riders spread out, circling the cabin. Eliza saw torches being lit, flames catching in the late afternoon dimness. Her breath came short and fast. They were going to die here, all of them, burned alive or shot trying to escape. Unless... "The root cellar," she said suddenly. "Behind the cabin, is there a way in from inside?" Hale's eyes snapped to her. "Through the bedroom floor, but we can't fight them all. But we can hide. Wait them out. They'll burn the cabin down on top of us. The cellar's stone, isn't it? And deep?" Understanding crossed his face. He nodded once, sharp. "Get down there. I'll hold them off long enough for you to get clear." "Warren, no. Eliza." He crossed to her, took her face in his hands, gentle despite the urgency. "You have to survive this. For her." He touched Daisy's head, just a brush of fingers. "Promise me." Tears burned her eyes. "Promise me you'll follow." "I'll try." It was all he could give her, and they both knew it. The first torch arced through the air, landing on the roof with a shower of sparks. Eliza ran. The bedroom was chaos, furniture overturned from the earlier ransacking, clothes scattered across the floor. Eliza stumbled through it, Daisy screaming against her chest, Copper clawing at her arm in panic. Behind her, she heard the crack of Hale's rifle, the answering thunder of return fire, wood splintering as bullets tore through the cabin walls. She found the trapdoor under the overturned bed frame and shoved it aside with strength born of desperation. The door was heavy oak with an iron ring set into the wood. She wrenched it open and stared down into darkness, a ladder descending into the earth. Smoke was already curling under the bedroom door, acrid and thick. Another torch hit the roof. She heard it land, heard the hungry crackle of flames finding purchase in the dry wood shingles. There was no more time. Eliza clutched Daisy with one arm, copper tucked inside her dress, and started down the ladder. The rungs were slick with age and moisture, and her boots slipped twice before she found her footing. The descent felt endless, each step taking her deeper into cold darkness, away from the battle raging above. When her feet finally hit packed earth, she could barely see. Thin light filtered down from the open trapdoor, showing her a small space carved from stone and dirt, maybe 10 feet square, the walls shored up with timber, the ceiling low and oppressive. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with preserves and root vegetables. A water barrel sat in the corner. It smelled of earth and potatoes and old fear. Above her, the gunfire intensified. She heard men shouting, heard Hale's voice cutting through the chaos, heard the ominous roar of fire spreading. Daisy's cries echoed off the stone walls, and Eliza pressed her hand gently over the baby's mouth, trying to muffle the sound. If Voss's men heard her down here... The trapdoor slammed shut, plunging them into absolute darkness. Eliza's heart stopped. Had Hale closed it to protect her? Or had it fallen on its own, sealing her tomb? She stood frozen in the blackness, Daisy squirming against her, every instinct screaming at her to climb back up, to open it, to know. Then she heard the bar drop into place from above, the heavy thud of wood settling into iron brackets. Someone had locked it from the outside. Warren. It had to be Warren. He'd locked her in to keep Voss's men from following, to give her a chance even as he... The thought broke off as gunfire erupted directly overhead, so close she could hear the spent shells hitting the bedroom floor. Someone shouted. Something heavy crashed down. Then silence, terrible and complete, broken only by the roar of flames. Eliza sank to the floor, her back against the cold stone wall, and held her children, because that's what they were now, both of them, Daisy and the small trembling kitten, and waited. The darkness was so absolute she couldn't see her own hands. The only sounds were Daisy's muffled whimpers, Copper's frightened mewing, and her own ragged breathing. Time became meaningless. Minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. The temperature in the cellar rose as fire consumed the cabin above. She felt heat radiating through the floor, heard timbers cracking and collapsing, the whole structure coming down in stages. Smoke seeped through the cracks around the trapdoor, and she moved to the farthest corner, pressing her face against a gap in the stone where fresh air whispered in from somewhere outside. Daisy cried and cried, then finally exhausted herself into fitful sleep. Copper had stopped moving, just a small warm weight against Eliza's ribs. She prayed he was sleeping and not, no. She couldn't think about that. Couldn't think about anything except the next breath, the next moment, surviving this. She tried not to think about Warren, tried not to imagine him lying dead in the burning cabin above, his body charring while she hid in the earth like a coward. But the images came anyway, relentless and horrible. He'd saved her, bought her freedom, defended her, given his life so she and Daisy could live, and she'd never even thanked him properly, never told him. What would she have told him? That in the brief weeks she'd known him, he'd shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in years? That the careful distance he kept, the respect he offered, the way he'd stood between her and violence, it had meant everything? That she'd started to imagine a future where fear wasn't her constant companion, where trust might be possible again? It didn't matter now. He was gone, and she was alone in the dark with two small lives depending on her. The heat grew unbearable. Eliza soaked a cloth from the water barrel and draped it over Daisy, trying to keep her cool. She did the same for Copper, who stirred weakly under her touch. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. She stayed pressed against the gap in the stone, taking shallow sips of air, fighting the urge to scream, to claw at the trap door, to give up. Then, slowly, the temperature began to drop. The roaring above quieted to pops and hisses. The smoke thinned. Night must have come, she thought. The fire was burning itself out. She waited longer, counting her breaths, measuring time by the gradual cooling of the air. When she finally couldn't stand it anymore, when the silence above had stretched for what felt like hours, she shifted Daisy into the crook of one arm and stood. Her legs barely held her. She felt her way through the darkness to the ladder and climbed. The trapdoor was still barred from above. She pushed against it, gently at first, then harder. It wouldn't budge. Something heavy was on top of it, debris from the collapsed cabin, probably. She was trapped. Panic clawed at her throat. She shoved against the door with all her strength, feeling something shift slightly, but not enough. She tried again, her shoulders screaming in protest, Daisy wailing now, startled awake by the movement. "Please," she whispered into the darkness. "Please, please, please." She threw her weight against it one more time, and something gave. Not the door itself, but whatever was on top of it shifted enough that she could push it up a few inches. Cold air rushed in, blessed and sweet. She sucked it down greedily, then pushed harder. The door lifted. She shoved aside a charred beam, then another, and climbed out into devastation. The cabin was gone. Just gone. Where there had been walls and a roof and the simple life Warren had built, there was now only smoldering wreckage and ash. The chimney stood alone like a tombstone, the only thing still intact. The barn had burned too, and the fences, and everything Eliza could see was painted in shades of black and gray. She stood in the ruins, Daisy quiet now in her arms, and turned in a slow circle. The sky was vast and full of stars, more stars than she'd ever seen, cold and indifferent to the destruction below. Smoke still rose in places, small fires still burning in the debris. And there, at the edge of the wreckage, she saw him. Warren lay on his back near what had been the front door, one arm flung out, his rifle a few feet away. He wasn't moving. Eliza's heart seized in her chest, and she stumbled toward him across the ash and broken wood, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. She fell to her knees beside him, Daisy clutched tight, and pressed her free hand to his chest. For a terrible moment there was nothing, just stillness and the horrible certainty of loss. Then, a heartbeat. Faint, unsteady, but there. "Warren!" She shook him, gentle at first, then harder. "Warren, wake up!" He didn't respond. She ran her hands over him, checking for wounds, and found blood, too much blood, soaking through his shirt on the left side. A bullet wound, she thought, or maybe shrapnel from the fire. His face was streaked with soot and ash, one side burned, his breathing shallow and labored. He was dying. Unless she did something, he was going to die right here in the ruins of his home, and she would be alone again. No. The word rose up from somewhere deep and fierce inside her. No, she'd lost too much already. She wasn't losing this too. Eliza looked around wildly. The barn was gone, the cabin was gone, but the well was still there, standing intact near where the kitchen had been. She laid Daisy down carefully in a clear spot, checking quickly to make sure Copper was still breathing. He was, barely, and ran to the well. She hauled up a bucket of cold water, carried it back, and started cleaning Warren's wounds. The bullet had gone through his side, missing vital organs but tearing muscle and causing terrible bleeding. She tore strips from her dress and bound the wound as tightly as she dared, her hands shaking but steady enough. He groaned when she tightened the bandage, his eyes flickering open. They were unfocused, glazed with pain and shock. "Eliza?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here. Don't talk. Save your strength." "Voss, yeah, gone. They're all gone." She hoped it was true. "You held them off, gave us time." He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Good." His eyes started to close again. "No!" She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Don't you dare leave me, Warren Hale. Don't you dare. I didn't survive this just to watch you die." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hope. "Bossy," he mumbled, "you have no idea." She grabbed the water bucket and poured some over his face, shocking him more awake. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Can you ride?" Don't think so." She looked around at the destruction, at the miles of empty country in every direction, and felt despair threatening to swallow her. Then Daisy made a small sound, and Eliza's resolve hardened. She'd carried a baby through childbirth with iron cuffs on her wrists. She'd faced down Voss in a courtroom. She'd survived in a root cellar while the world burned above her. She could do this too. Then we'll figure something else out. She retrieved Daisy and Copper, tucked them close, and settled beside Warren. "We'll wait for dawn. Someone will come. Sheriff Garrett will come." "Might not. He will. And until he does, I'm staying right here." She took Warren's hand, lacing her fingers through his. We're all staying. He squeezed her hand weakly. Stubborn woman. You're only now figuring that out? This time his smile was real, though it cost him. No. Knew it. Auction yard. They fell silent. Eliza kept her hand in his, feeling his pulse against her palm, counting the beats. As long as his heart kept beating, there was hope. As long as they kept breathing, they had a chance. The night stretched on, cold and endless. Eliza dozed in fits, jerking awake at every sound, checking Warren's breathing, his pulse, the blood seeping through the bandages. She changed them once, using the last of her dress to make fresh wrappings. Daisy nursed and slept, woke and cried, nursed and slept again. Copper had revived enough to lap a little water from her cupped hand. When dawn finally broke, gray and reluctant, Eliza heard horses. She tensed, reaching for Warren's rifle, but the riders that appeared over the hill weren't Voss's men. It was Sheriff Garrett, and he had a dozen men with him, all armed, all grim-faced. Garrett took in the destruction with a sweep of his eyes, then dismounted and ran to where Eliza sat with Warren. Jesus Christ, what happened? Voss? Her voice was hoarse from smoke and crying. He came with men, tried to burn us out. Warren held them off long enough for us to hide, but... She gestured at Warren's still form. He's hurt bad. Garrett knelt beside Warren, checking his wounds with experienced hands. He's lost a lot of blood, but he's breathing steady enough. We need to get him to town, to the doctor. He looked at Eliza. Where's Voss now? I don't know. After the fire, I didn't see... I was in the cellar. One of the other men approached, his face hard. Sheriff, we found tracks heading south. Looks like they rode out hours ago. Get a posse together. I want Voss found and brought in. Dead or alive, I don't care which. Garrett's voice was steel. When the man left, he turned back to Eliza. Can you ride? I can do whatever I need to do. Good woman. He whistled, and two men came forward with a makeshift stretcher. They loaded Warren onto it as carefully as they could, though he groaned with every movement. Garrett helped Eliza onto a horse, settling Daisy in her arms, and mounted his own. The ride to town was agony. Warren drifted in and out of consciousness, his face pale as death. Eliza rode beside the stretcher, one hand reaching down to grip his whenever his eyes opened. Each time he found her gaze and held it, drawing strength from the connection. Stay with me, she whispered, just a little longer. The town came into view as the sun climbed higher, its few streets already bustling with morning activity. People stopped and stared as the grim procession passed, word spreading like wildfire. Garrett led them straight to the doctor's house, a neat white building with a shingle hanging out front. Dr. Pierce was a middle-aged woman with capable hands and sharp eyes. She took one look at Warren and started barking orders. Get him inside, clear the table. I need hot water and clean linens, now. They carried Warren into the examination room. Dr. Pierce cut away his bloody shirt, revealing the full extent of his injuries. Besides the gunshot wound, he had burns on his arms and face, broken ribs, and a gash across his forehead that would need stitches. Out, the doctor said to everyone but her assistant. I need room to work. Garrett guided Eliza to the waiting room, a small space with hard wooden chairs and windows overlooking the street. She sank into a chair, Daisy finally sleeping against her shoulder, Copper curled in her lap. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was draining away, leaving her hollow and shaking. He's gonna make it, Garrett said quietly. Warren's tough as they come. He better, Eliza's voice broke. I can't. I know. Garrett sat beside her. I need to ask you some questions, while it's fresh. Can you manage that? She nodded, though the thought of reliving it made her want to scream, but she walked him through it. The torches, the gunfire, the cellar, the terrible hours in the dark. Garrett listened, his expression growing darker with each detail. Voss is finished, he said when she was done. Even if we don't catch him, word of this will spread. No judge in the territory will protect him now. You're safe. Safe. The words still didn't feel real. What about Warren's ranch? Everything he had can be rebuilt. Ranch hands are already out there, making sure the stock didn't scatter. The land's still good, the well's intact. It's not gone, Eliza. Just damaged. Before she could respond, Dr. Pierce emerged, wiping blood from her hands. Eliza shot to her feet. "He's alive," the doctor said immediately. "Lost a lot of blood, and he's not out of danger yet. But the bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. If infection doesn't set in, he should pull through." The relief was so intense, Eliza had to sit down again. "Can I see him?" "He's sedated. Probably will be for a while, but yes, you can sit with him." Warren lay on a narrow bed in the back room, his chest wrapped in clean bandages, his breathing slow but steady. His face was pale against the white pillow, the burns on his cheek angry and red. Eliza pulled a chair close and sat, taking his hand again. "You did it," she whispered. "We made it. Both of us." His fingers twitched in hers, and she chose to believe he'd heard her. The hours passed in a strange blur. People came and went, Garrett with updates on the search for Voss, townspeople bringing food and blankets, the doctor checking Warren's vitals. Eliza stayed in her chair, Daisy in her arms, refusing to leave. Night fell again, the second night since the attack, and still she sat. It was near midnight when Warren's eyes finally opened, clear and focused. He looked around, confused, then found Eliza. "Hey," he croaked. "Hey yourself." She squeezed his hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot and set on fire." "That's because you did." She felt tears threatening and fought them back. "You scared me half to death, Warren Hale." "Sorry." He tried to sit up and failed, grimacing. "Voss?" "Gone. Sheriff's hunting him, but he ran." She helped him take a sip of water. "It's over, Warren. Really over." He studied her face in the lamplight, something shifting in his expression. "The cabin is gone. I'm sorry. I know it was your home. It was wood and nails. You're what matters, you and Daisy." His voice was rough with exhaustion and emotion. "Are you hurt?" "No, copper either. We all made it because of you." He closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I thought, when I locked that door, I thought I'd never see you again." "I thought the same." Eliza set Daisy down in the basket the doctor had provided and leaned closer. "But we're both still here, still breathing, and we're going to stay that way." Warren's hand came up, shaking, to touch her face. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, gentle despite the tremor. "Eliza, rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." "No." His grip on her tightened. Need to say it now, in case you're going to be fine. "Listen." He pulled her closer, his voice barely a whisper. "I know you don't owe me anything. I know you've been hurt, used, and you got every reason not to trust any man. But I need you to know, these past weeks, having you there, watching you get stronger, watching you with Daisy." He stopped, gathering words. "You made that cabin a home, and I don't want to rebuild it unless you're there too." Eliza's breath caught. "Warren, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I'm asking you to stay. However long you want, whatever terms you set. Just stay." She looked at him, at this man who'd bought her freedom and asked for nothing, who'd stood against violence to protect her, who'd nearly died so she could live. And she thought about the weeks in his cabin, the unlocked doors, the careful respect, the slow dawning of something she'd been too afraid to name. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "Not because I owe you. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I'll stay because I want to." His eyes searched hers. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He smiled then, tired and painful but real, and pulled her hand to his chest, holding it over his heart. "Then we'll rebuild it together. Make it ours." Ours. The word was a promise and a hope, and a future she'd stopped believing in. Eliza leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, careful of his injuries, and let herself believe it. 3 days later, word came that Voss had been found dead in a ravine 30 miles south, thrown from his horse and broken on the rocks. Whether it was accident or justice or simply fate, no one could say. But he was gone, and with him the last shadow that had hung over Eliza's freedom. She stood in Dr. Pierce's office and listened to Garrett deliver the news and felt nothing. No relief, no joy, no satisfaction. Just the quiet certainty that one chapter had ended and another was beginning. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide what comes next," Garrett said. "You're a free woman with a child and a future. Where you go, what you do, that's up to you." Eliza looked through the window to where Warren sat in the sun, his strength slowly returning, Daisy on his lap and Copper at his feet. He looked up as if feeling her gaze and smiled. "I think," she said slowly, "I already know where I'm going." Warren was strong enough to travel by the end of the week. Doctor. Pierce had protested, insisting he needed another few days at minimum, but he'd countered that lying in a borrowed bed while his land sat empty was worse for his health than any bullet wound. The doctor had relented with strict instructions about changing bandages and avoiding heavy work. Instructions Warren had nodded at with the kind of solemn agreement that meant he'd do exactly as he pleased the moment her back was turned. Eliza had learned to read him in the quiet hours she'd spent at his bedside. Learned the set of his jaw that meant he'd made up his mind, the way his eyes went distant when he was thinking about the ranch, the slight softening around his mouth when he looked at Daisy. She was learning him the way she'd once learned to anticipate danger, except this time the knowledge brought comfort instead of fear. They left town on a clear morning, Garrett and 2 ranch hands accompanying them. The supplies loaded in the wagon bed were donations from townspeople: lumber, nails, blankets, food, tools. Word of what had happened had spread, and with it a quiet outpouring of support that had surprised Eliza. She'd lived so long believing the world was full of people like Voss that she'd forgotten there were also people like the widow who'd brought baby clothes, like the blacksmith who'd donated an anvil and forge tools, like the woman from the general store who'd pressed a rag doll into Eliza's hands for when Daisy was older. The ride back felt different from every other journey Eliza had made. She wasn't running toward something or away from something. She was just going home. The word still felt strange in her mouth, untested, but she was learning to trust it the way she was learning to trust everything else. When they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Warren went still beside her. The destruction looked worse in daylight than it had in the chaos of that terrible night. The blackened footprint where the cabin had stood, the collapsed barn, the scorched pastures. But beyond the ruin, the land itself rolled on unchanged. The creek still ran clear, the pines still stood tall, and in the distance cattle grazed where the ranch hands had managed to round them up. "It's not as bad as it looks," Garrett said quietly. "Foundation's still good, well's intact. You got water, you got land, you got stock. Rest is just work." Warren dismounted slowly, favoring his injured side, and walked to what had been the cabin's threshold. He stood there for a long moment, his back to them, and Eliza couldn't read his expression. Then he turned, and she saw not grief but determination in his face. "Let's get started," he said. The first week was about survival. They erected a temporary shelter using salvaged wood and canvas, barely more than a lean-to but enough to keep the rain off. Warren insisted on helping despite his injuries, and Eliza quickly learned that the only way to stop him from overexerting was to give him tasks he could do sitting down: sorting nails, planning the new cabin's layout, teaching her how to properly oil and maintain the tools. She worked alongside the ranch hands during the day, learning to measure and cut lumber, to drive nails straight, to mix mortar. Her hands blistered and bled, then calloused over. Her back ached from unfamiliar labor. But there was something deeply satisfying about watching walls rise from ash, about building something instead of merely surviving. Daisy spent her days in a wooden box padded with blankets, close enough that Eliza could check on her between tasks. She was growing, filling out, her eyes tracking movement now with clear interest. Copper had recovered from his injuries and appointed himself the baby's guardian, curling up beside her box and hissing at anyone who got too close except Eliza and Warren. At night, they gathered around a fire outside the lean-to. Warren would hold Daisy while Eliza cooked whatever simple meal they'd managed, and they'd talk about the day's progress, about plans for tomorrow, about small things that didn't matter, except that they did. These conversations felt precious to Eliza in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The ordinariness of them, the assumption of a shared future they contained. One evening, about 2 weeks after their return, Warren spoke into a comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about the new cabin." "What about it?" Eliza was mending one of his shirts, her stitches clumsy but functional. "Where to put the rooms? Was thinking maybe 2 bedrooms instead of 1. Give you and Daisy your own space. Privacy. Eliza's hand stilled on the fabric. She understood what he was really saying, that he expected nothing from her, that even now he was maintaining the careful distance he'd always kept. It should have relieved her. Instead, it made her sad in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Warren," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did you never She struggled for words. "That first night, when you brought me here, you could have demanded anything, could have used the fact that you'd bought me to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Warren was silent for a long moment, his gaze on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. "My sister Emma, I told you about her. What I didn't tell you was that toward the end, before she died, I managed to see her once. Snuck into the man's property. She didn't even look like herself anymore. Hollow. Broken." He swallowed hard. "She looked at me and said, 'Tom, I don't remember what it feels like to say no.' That's what he'd taken from her. Not just her body or her labor, her belief that she had any right to refuse." He turned to look at Eliza, his eyes bright in the firelight. "So when I saw you on that auction block, when I brought you here, the only thing I wanted was to give you back what my sister lost. The right to say no. The right to choose. Everything else, if there was ever going to be anything else, it had to come from you choosing it freely, not because you felt obligated or afraid or trapped." Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes. She set down the mending and moved closer to where he sat. "What if I wanted to choose something?" His breath caught. "Eliza, I'm not Emma. I'm not your sister or your responsibility or your burden." She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his scarred, calloused ones. "These past weeks, watching you with Daisy, working beside you, building this life, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Not because I owe you or because I'm afraid or because I don't have other options, but because when I think about the future, you're in it." Warren's grip tightened on her hand. "You're sure? Because, Eliza, if you're not ready, I'm ready to try, to see what we could be if we both chose it." She smiled, though tears were streaming down her face now. "That's all I'm asking, a chance to try." He reached up with his free hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Then we'll try. Slow, careful. You set the pace." "Slow sounds good," she whispered. "I don't think I know how to do this any other way." "Then we'll figure it out together." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and kissed her forehead with such tenderness that it broke something open in her chest, not breaking apart, but breaking free, the last chains of fear and expectation falling away. The cabin took shape over the following weeks. It was smaller than the original, more efficiently laid out, with 2 bedrooms as Warren had suggested, and a main room that would serve as kitchen and living space. The ranch hands worked alongside them, and on Sundays people from town would ride out to help. The widow with the baby clothes, the blacksmith, families Eliza had never met, who simply showed up with tools and willing hands. She learned their names, learned their stories, learned that community wasn't something you were born into, but something you built. One shared meal and conversation at a time. She learned to accept help without shame, to offer it in return. The isolation she'd lived in for so long, the conviction that she could only rely on herself, was slowly replaced by the radical notion that she didn't have to carry everything alone. By early spring, the cabin was finished enough to move into. It still needed a proper floor and the windows needed glass instead of oiled paper, but the roof was solid and the walls were tight, and it was theirs. Eliza stood in the doorway on the first night, Daisy on her hip, and looked around at the space they'd created from ruin. Warren came up behind her, his presence warm and steady. "What do you think?" "I think it's home," she said, and meant it. They established routines. Warren worked the ranch with his hired men, slowly building back the herd, repairing fences, planning for the future. Eliza managed the house, cared for Daisy, and started a garden plot near the creek. She also began helping with the books, discovering she had a head for numbers and organization. Warren was good with cattle and land, but terrible with paperwork, and they fell into an easy partnership where each contributed what they did best. Daisy grew and changed with alarming speed. She smiled now, real smiles that lit up her whole face, and she'd started making sounds that weren't quite words but felt like the beginning of them. She had Eliza's nose and an indeterminate eye color that seemed to shift between green and hazel, depending on the light. Warren doted on her shamelessly, carving her toys and singing her nonsense songs in a surprisingly decent voice. One evening in late April, Eliza stood at the creek washing clothes while Daisy napped in the cabin and Warren worked on a broken fence nearby. The water was cold from snowmelt, and her hands were numb, but the repetitive motion was soothing. She was hanging a shirt on the line when she heard hoofbeats. Her whole body tensed, old instincts flaring. Warren heard it too and straightened, his hand moving toward the rifle he now kept close when working outside. But the rider who appeared was Sheriff Garrett, alone and empty-handed. "Afternoon," he called, dismounting. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Never," Warren said, though his posture didn't fully relax. "What brings you out?" Garrett pulled an envelope from his coat. "Legal business, I'm afraid. Need both of you for this." Eliza's stomach clenched. She dried her hands and joined them, Warren's arm coming around her shoulders in silent support. "Nothing bad," Garrett said quickly, seeing their faces. "Opposite, actually. Judge Morrison wanted me to deliver these personally." He handed Warren the envelope. Inside were two documents. The first was a formal declaration nullifying Eliza's indenture contract with Voss, signed by the judge and sealed with the territorial stamp. The second was a bill of sale, the original from the auction, marked void in bold letters across the front. "What does this mean?" Eliza asked, her voice shaking. "It means you're not just free because Voss is dead or because a judge said so in a hearing," Garrett explained. "It means the whole transaction that made you property in the first place is erased from the record. Far as the territory is concerned, you were never owned by anyone. You're just Eliza Marrow, free citizen." The papers trembled in Eliza's hands. Free. Not freed, not released, not purchased and then liberated. Just free, as if she always had been. "There's more," Garrett continued. "Investigation into Voss's operation turned up 8 other women in situations similar to yours. They've all been released, and the territorial government is pursuing charges against 3 other men who were running the same scheme. Judge Morrison wanted you to know your testimony started something, made it possible for them to come forward." Eliza couldn't speak. She stared at the papers, at the official words that unmade her bondage, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. Warren's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Thank you," Warren said quietly when Eliza couldn't find words, "for bringing this out personally." "Least I could do." Garrett tipped his hat. "You two, you've built something good here. From ashes, literally. People notice that kind of thing. You're part of this community now, whether you planned on it or not." After Garrett left, Eliza and Warren stood together in the yard, the papers still in her hands. Finally, she folded them carefully and looked up at him. "I want to marry you," she said. Warren blinked, clearly surprised. "Eliza, I know we said slow. I know we're still figuring this out, but I don't want to be your housekeeper or your responsibility or the woman you're protecting. I want to be your wife, your partner, your equal." She took his hands. "If you'll have me." Warren's face transformed, breaking into a smile so wide and genuine it made him look years younger. "If I'll have you? Eliza, I've been half in love with you since you held that rifle and told Voss's men you weren't going anywhere. I just didn't think. I didn't dare hope." "Hope," she said firmly. "We both get to hope now." He kissed her then, properly this time, and it was nothing like the tentative brush of lips she'd experienced before. It was a promise and a question and an answer all at once. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless, Eliza was laughing. "Was that slow enough?" Warren asked, grinning. "We can work on your pacing." They were married 3 weeks later in the meadow behind the new cabin, wildflowers beginning to bloom in the long grass. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony, and what felt like half the town attended. Eliza wore a simple dress that the widow had made, and Warren wore his best shirt with his hair actually combed for once. Daisy, held by Dr. Pierce during the ceremony, made enthusiastic babbling sounds that everyone agreed counted as approval. When Morrison asked if anyone objected to the union, Copper, sitting in the front row of assembled guests, meowed loudly. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, and Eliza felt something in her chest expand to hold all of it, the joy, the community, the sheer impossible rightness of this moment. "I do," she said, when it was her turn, her voice clear and strong. "I do." Warren echoed, his eyes never leaving hers. The kiss that sealed it was witnessed by friends and neighbors and the vast Wyoming sky, and when it ended, Eliza turned to face their guests as Mrs. Eliza Hale, a name she'd chosen and a life she'd built on her own terms. The years that followed were not without hardship. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle lost to disease, crops that failed. Warren's injuries from the fire left him with chronic pain that worsened in cold weather. Eliza still woke sometimes from nightmares, still flinched at sudden movements, still carried scars that would never fully heal. But there was also joy, more than Eliza had known was possible. There was Daisy's first word, Mama, and her first steps, taken between Eliza and Warren as they both reached for her. There was a son, born 2 years after the fire, whom they named Thomas after Warren's middle name and Garrett's first. There was Copper growing fat and lazy, followed eventually by a whole colony of barn cats. There were summer evenings on the porch, Warren teaching Daisy her letters while Tom napped in Eliza's arms. There were harsh winters weathered together, the four of them huddled by the fire while wind howled outside. There were neighbors becoming friends, Sunday dinners that stretched for hours, helping hands offered and accepted in both directions. Eliza learned to ride well enough to help with the cattle. She expanded the garden until it produced more than they could use, selling the surplus in town. She taught herself to read better, then started teaching other women, gathering them at the cabin once a week for lessons. Some of them were former indentured servants, freed by the investigation her testimony had sparked. They never spoke directly about their shared past, but the understanding was there in the careful way they treated each other, the absence of judgment, the quiet solidarity. Warren built a larger barn, then a proper bunkhouse for the ranch hands. The cattle herd grew. They added chickens, then pigs, then a milk cow Daisy named Buttercup. The ranch became profitable, then prosperous, and with prosperity came the ability to help others, hiring men down on their luck, extending credit to neighbors hit by hard times, supporting the church and school, even though neither Warren nor Eliza were particularly religious or educated in formal ways. 5 years after Voss's death, Eliza stood in the meadow where they'd been married and watched Daisy chase butterflies with Tom toddling after her. The little girl was 5 now, all wild dark hair and fearless curiosity, asking endless questions about everything. Tom was 2, quieter but watchful, with Warren's steady temperament. They were beautiful and whole and free in ways Eliza was still learning to comprehend. Warren came up beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "What are you thinking?" "That I never imagined this," she said honestly. "Even in my best dreams, I couldn't picture something this good." "You built it. We built it." "We did." She leaned into him, comfortable in a way that still sometimes surprised her. "Do you ever think about that day, the auction?" "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how close I came to not going. Almost skipped it, thought I had too much work." He shook his head. "Imagine if I had. Someone else would have bought me. Maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe—" He stopped, unable to finish the thought. Eliza understood. There were 1,000 ways her story could have ended differently, most of them badly. The fact that it had ended here, in this meadow, with this man and these children, felt less like fate and more like a series of small miracles strung together. "I'm glad you went," she said softly. "Me too." They stood together watching their children play until Daisy noticed them and came running, Tom struggling to keep up on his shorter legs. "Mama! Papa! Come see! There's a nest!" Warren scooped up Tom while Eliza took Daisy's hand, and they walked together to see whatever treasure she'd found. It turned out to be a robin's nest, built low in a berry bush, with 3 speckled eggs nestled inside. "Baby birds," Daisy breathed, reverent. "Can we keep them?" "They're not for keeping," Eliza said gently. "They belong to their mama. We can watch them, though, see them grow." "Like me and Tom?" "Exactly like you and Tom." They visited the nest every day after that, watching the eggs hatch, watching the tiny naked chicks grow feathers, watching the mother robin feed them tirelessly. And then one morning the nest was empty, the fledglings having taken flight. Daisy was devastated. "They left, without saying goodbye." "That's what babies do," Warren said, crouching beside her. "They grow up and fly away." But that doesn't mean they forget where they came from. Will I fly away? Warren and Eliza exchanged a look over her head. Someday, Eliza said, when you're ready, but not for a long time yet. Good. Daisy hugged her fiercely. I don't want to go anywhere. Neither do I, Eliza whispered, meaning it with everything she was. The seasons turned, summers of hard work and harvest, winters of rest and planning. Daisy started school, learning to read with the same fierce determination she applied to everything. Tom followed her everywhere, content to be her shadow. New ranch hands were hired as the operation expanded. Garrett retired and was replaced by a younger sheriff who still came to Eliza occasionally for advice on cases involving women in difficult situations. On Daisy's 10th birthday, Eliza gave her the rag doll the woman from the general store had given her years ago. She'd kept it safe all this time, waiting for the right moment. This was given to me when you were just a baby, she told Daisy, by a woman who wanted you to have something to hold on to. I think you're old enough for it now. Daisy cradled the doll carefully. What was it like when I was a baby? Eliza considered how much truth to tell. She and Warren had agreed they wouldn't lie to the children about their past, but they'd also agreed to wait until they were old enough to understand. Looking at Daisy now, at her serious face and questioning eyes, Eliza thought maybe that time had come. It was hard, she said carefully. I was in a bad situation, and I didn't know how to get out of it. But then your papa helped me, and we built something new together. We built this life. We built our family. Were you scared? Terrified. But I had you, and that made me brave. Daisy processed this, turning the doll over in her hands. I'm glad Papa helped you. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. That night, after the children were asleep, Eliza and Warren sat on the porch, as they often did, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. 17 years had passed since the auction, and they were both showing the wear of them, Warren's hair more gray than brown, Eliza's hands permanently marked by work. But they'd built something that would outlast them, something good and solid and free. Do you think she understood? Warren asked. What you told her? Enough. The rest can wait. Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. We did all right, didn't we? Despite everything? We did better than all right. We did impossible. He kissed the top of her head. And we're not done yet. No, Eliza agreed, smiling in the darkness. We're not done yet. But the story of how she came to be here, sold on an auction block, saved by a quiet rancher, fighting her way to freedom and building a life from ashes, that story was done. It had an ending now. Not the one anyone would have predicted, but the right one nonetheless. It ended here, on this porch, with these people. In this life they'd chosen and built and defended. It ended with children sleeping safely in their beds, with land that belonged to them, with neighbors who'd become family, with love that had grown from respect and choice rather than obligation. It ended with Eliza Merrow Hale, free woman, beloved wife, fierce mother, member of a community, owner of her own life and story. Not property, not owned, not for sale, just free. And that, finally, was enough.